Did you know that parents rank financial literacy as the #1 most difficult life skill to teach? Meet Greenlight, the debit card and money app for families. With Greenlight, you can send money to kids quickly, set up chores, automate allowance, and keep an eye on your kids' spending with real-time notifications. Kids learn to earn, save, and spend wisely, and parents can rest easy knowing their kids are learning about money with guardrails in place. Try Greenlight risk-free today at greenlight.com/Wondery.
Bombas makes the most comfortable socks, underwear, and T-shirts.
Warning, Bombas are so absurdly comfortable you may throw out all your other clothes.
Sorry, do we legally have to say that?
No, this is just how I talk, and I really love my Bombas.
They do feel that good. And they do good, too. One item purchased equals one item donated.
To feel good and do good, go to bombas.com/Wondery and use code WONDERY for 20% off your first purchase. That's BOMBAS.com/Wondery and use code WONDERY at checkout.
The Prosecutors Podcast is brought to you by Progressive. Progressive helps you compare direct auto rates from a variety of companies so you can find a great one, even if it's not with them. Quote today at Progressive.com to find a rate that works with your budget. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Comparison rates not available in all states or situations.
1/3 of all murder cases in America remain open.
He had told me that if I opened my eyes, he would slit my throat.
Each one is called a cold case.
The DNA evidence taken from the victim was a match. The Linden rapist was at it again.
Based on the hit A&E television program.
A phone call is placed, one that changes a family's life forever.
Cold Case Files, the podcast.
If you could see the fire in his eyes, he screamed at me, "You want it? Get your tape recorder out."
Get new episodes of Cold Case Files every Tuesday on Podcast One, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and anywhere you listen to podcasts.
I'm Brett.
And I'm Alice.
And we are the Prosecutors. Today on the Prosecutors. When Ellen Greenberg was found stabbed to death in her locked apartment, the police ruled it a suicide. But did they get it horribly wrong? Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of The Prosecutors. I'm Brett, and I'm joined, as always, by my superb co-host, Alice.
Brett, you're just pumping me up because it's been a long week.
It has been a long week, but you've been superb through the entirety of it.
Well, that's nice of you to say. I really thought you were going to go with cheesy because Brett called me when I was like mid-bite into a block of cheese. Like I was too lazy to go get a knife to cut the block of cheese. And I'm admitting to you guys just who I am because, you know, one of my favorite scenes in television is in 30 Rock when Tina Fey is like sitting in her New York apartment in what is it called? The blanket that has the sleeves. And she's like eating a block of cheese. Yeah, exactly. She's eating a block of cheese and she's singing, "Working on my night cheese." That's what I sing all the time when I eat a block of cheese.
Wow. Well, that's amazing. I mean, look, cheese is one of God's gifts to humans. I do love cheese.
So anyways, thanks for not pointing it out, but I thought I would reveal it to everyone I smack through the cheese.
I wish I had some cheese. It's kind of selfish of you.
Bring you
didn't
some.
share any. You should.
I'll bring you some. I mean, I don't think you want this block because my like teeth marks are on it, but
yeah, probably not. I may have to get my own cheese.
I offered. I'm a good friend.
Thank you. You are a good friend. Well, Alice, we're starting today on what'll probably be a couple, 3 episodes. We'll see how long it takes. It's a case that's been requested by a ton of you guys. It is a great mystery, a tragedy. I mean, there's so much tied into this. You have the mystery, you have a family that's looking for answers, and you have possible police, I don't want to say misconduct, but certainly a sloppy job done by the police. And all these things come together. We talk about this sometimes. Why are cases unsolved? Why do they become true crime obsessions? And a lot of times when you have a sympathetic victim and you have the police not doing a great job, and then you throw in a family who's looking for answers, that is a case that's going to become popular. This case, though, has something that makes it different from so many that we have covered. It is almost a story out of fiction. This is the mystery of Ellen Greenberg and how she ended up dead in her locked apartment. It's a case that a lot of you guys have requested, and it's one that we wanted to cover. I do want to acknowledge a couple people. When we decided we were going to do this, I noticed that Big Mad True Crime had covered the case. And so I texted Heather Ashley and I was like, hey, I'm going to listen to your episode on Ellen Greenberg because we're going to cover the case. And she immediately came back and was like, here's all of the research I did. Here are all the documents. She gave us the script from the show. She was like, here's the script. You can use that. I mean, just...
Heather is incredible. I mean, she's a great researcher. She's a great friend. I mean, she's just an incredible podcaster. And most people won't just show all their work like that. And it shows you how good her work is, though, right? Her work stands up, and what she has to add stands up on its own. This is what people do in academics. Whenever you publish an academic article, we'd like to say that what we're doing is academic. You show all of your work and you show all of your sources so others can make sure you're getting it right. And that's what she's doing. And I just want to applaud her because I don't think everyone does that in the true crime world, but we've really come to respect her work.
I mean, I think she has really one of the best podcasts out there. It's amazing. We're going to take, who knows how long we'll take to cover this case. She will have covered it better in one episode in like 45 minutes than we will in 6 hours. So if you're not listening to Big Mad True Crime, you need to listen to it. Alice is 100% right. Her research is fantastic. And she's in this for the right reason. I mean, she said, this is a family that needs answers and you guys can help get there. So take whatever you need. And that's exactly what we want. And another person that I want to give a similar praise to is Gavin Fish. I was listening to Stephanie Harlow's YouTube channel and she covered this case as well. And she kept talking about Gavin Fish. So I looked him up. He's covered this case and man, it's amazing. He's on YouTube. He doesn't have a podcast yet. He should though, because he's fantastic. If you guys are fascinated by this case, go look up Gavin Fish, watch his videos. He's done a lot of recreations, which are really fascinating. And I emailed him and said, hey, just wanted to let you know, I saw your stuff. It's great. We're going to do this case. And he immediately emailed back with his phone number. I ended up talking to him for over an hour. And he said, anything that you need, anything you want to use from my site, use it. And I just want to, like I said, applaud these two people because that's what we want in true crime, right? I mean, like Alice said, if you're really in this for the right reason and you're trying to help people and you think that your stuff is good, you shouldn't have any problem sharing it. You know, these are not people who are going to take down a timeline because they get their feelings hurt because they're not getting enough credit. Like, that's not the kind of people these are. These are good people who are doing good stuff. And I hope you guys will support them. And they have the added advantage of not just being good people, but actually put out really good stuff. So it's not that you're just listening to them because they're good people. You actually will find fascinating stuff with both Heather on Big Mad True Crime and Gavin Fish on his YouTube page. So I hope you guys will check that out. So let's dive into the case. And we'll start with a little literary flourish because this is a story as old as Edgar Allan Poe's The Murders in the Rue Morgue, one of people's favorite kinds of mystery, the locked room mystery. It's an impossible crime. A crime is committed in a room that's locked from the inside with no obvious way to get in or out. How did it happen? But in this case, in January 2011, a real locked room mystery unfolded in Philadelphia, and people are still debating just what happened. So Ellen Greenberg was a 27-year-old elementary school teacher in Philadelphia who seemingly had it all. She loved her job. She loved working with kids. She'd actually gone back to school to be a teacher when she realized that her first career wasn't what she wanted to do. And she was in a position where she not only was working with kids, she was in a position of leadership. So she was helping shape her school and shape the curriculum. And her boyfriend of 3 years, Sam Goldberg, was now her fiancé, having recently proposed. She was planning for the wedding. She was sending out invitations Everything seemed fine, and no one could have expected the bizarre, insane series of events that would take place on January 26th, 2011. On that day, Ellen had been sent home early from work as a nor'easter was barreling down on Philadelphia, bringing a lot of snow with it. And those of you who live in the Northeast, you know, it's got to be a lot of snow to actually close the schools. In Alabama, when I was growing up, if there was going to be a flurry, they closed the schools. It was just automatic.
Same in Texas, Brett.
Yeah, there you go, Texas, right? I mean,
it was a chance of hitting below 40 degrees and we were sent home.
Yeah, exactly. And look, you know, you guys up north laugh at us, but we don't have these trucks with the salt and the sand and scraping the roads. We don't have that. So if a little snow gets on the roads, it gets really hard to drive. In any event, Philadelphia, on the other hand, deals with this a lot. So, you know, a lot of snow was coming. She was glad to get out of there. She actually texted one of her friends that she was really relieved that she was going to be able to go home. So she heads home. She's at home with her fiance, Sam. And as the afternoon heads into the night, Sam decides he's going to head downstairs to their building's gym. 45 minutes or so later, he comes back to find the door inexplicably locked. He knocks for a few minutes, but when no one answers, he texts Ellen asking her to let him in. When she didn't respond, his text got more and more aggressive. At some point, he goes back downstairs and he asks a security guard to help him break down the door. Now, the door is locked. We're going to talk about this more with one of those swing bar type situations. So you guys have all been in hotels. There's a little bar on the door. There's a little thing that swings over it. So you can actually open the door 3 or 4 inches or so. It's like, you know, it used to be a chain, but that wasn't very secure, so they made it into a bar. So you can actually open the door a few inches, but you can't open it all the way. So you got Sam, he's in the hallway. He's yelling into the apartment, asking for Ellen to come. She's not hearing him. Neighbors will hear all this commotion. He's sending texts. We're going to talk about the text later. He's calling her. He's sending emails, everything. Nothing. So finally, he's like, and I don't know if it's out of concern or just irritation. He goes down. He finds a security guard and says, "Hey, man, I need you to help me break down this door." The security guard, not surprisingly, is like, "Well, that's kind of against building policy to break down doors, so I'm not going to be able to help you do that. If you want to call the police, we can do that, but I'm not going to break down the door for you." So Sam decides, whatever, I'm going to do it myself. So he goes back up to his apartment, he puts his shoulder into it, and he breaks down the door. It's not as dramatic as it sounds. He basically forces the door enough that this locking mechanism disengages, and he's able to get inside. And when he does, he sees a terrible sight. Ellen was in the kitchen, slumped against the cabinets, unconscious. What he didn't know at the time, but would later learn, is that she had been stabbed 20 times. Ellen would never regain consciousness, and she'd be declared dead at the scene when paramedics arrived. When the police showed up and they started looking around, it was a strange scene. There was no sign of a robbery, no sign of a struggle. And of course, the door had been locked from the inside. The police reached a shocking but seemingly inevitable conclusion. Ellen had killed herself. She had stabbed herself to death. But the more her family looked, the more they noticed details and inconsistencies that the police seemingly missed. And it wasn't long before people beyond just Ellen's closest friends and family began to wonder, could she have been murdered?
So you have the scene here, but let's dive into the timeline because all of this happens in a relatively short amount of time. So I think every minute matters. Let's talk about the day that Ellen died. At 7 a.m., Ellen talks to her mom on the phone, and it's a pleasant conversation, and there's no indication that anything is wrong, just a regular conversation. And this is, again, in January 26th, 2011, the day that she was sent home early for this winter storm. Now, she's at school, and then at 1:30 p.m., Ellen stops on the way home from school and puts gas in her car. An hour later at 2:30, Ellen calls a restaurant, though according to Gavin Fish's timeline of events, it's unclear why. At about 4:46 p.m., Ellen's computer is used for the last time. So far, pretty regular day, leaves work early, filling up the car, maybe ordering some food from a restaurant on her computer at home.
And a couple things to point out about these two things that you've noted. And we say this in a lot of cases, but as Alice said, every moment's going to be important in this day. And remember, the whole point of this exercise is to determine whether or not Ellen killed herself or was a victim of foul play. So you start to try and get into the person's mind. We talked about this when we covered the Damien Hurd case, and with the understanding that spontaneous suicides happen. We've talked about that. It's something that I think people get wrong a lot, that they assume that if you are thinking about taking your own life, that you are planning it, that you're giving all your stuff away, you're writing a nice long note, you're getting all your affairs in order. That certainly happens, but there are also definitely instances where suicide is more of a spontaneous thing. Having said that, there are a couple things happening here that seem a little incongruous with suicide. The conversation with her mom doesn't seem like anything's wrong. Ellen puts gas in her car, which is the kind of thing you do when you're thinking about the future. You know, you got a nor'easter coming, it's smart to stop and get gas. So she does that. She's talking to this restaurant. She's doing all these normal things that seem to indicate that she has every intention of being alive the next day or whatever. So those are things to remember and things that are interesting when you're considering what happened here.
Absolutely. Okay. Remember, 4:46, Ellen's computer is used for the last time. At 4:50, Sam leaves to go to the gym, and the police pull his key fob records. And sure enough, he buzzed into the building gym that night, and cameras catch him entering the gym at 4:54, about the amount of time it takes to go from his apartment all the way down to the basement gym. Shortly after 5:30, Sam arrives back at the apartment. So he's only at the gym for about 35 minutes. Not throwing shade. That's probably about how long I spent at the gym too. But it's not a very long workout.
I kept thinking, is this significant that he's only there for 35 minutes? And I was like, man, the number of times I go to the gym and like run on the treadmill for 10 minutes and then like, okay, I'm done. I'm going home.
But I think what it notes is that if when he left Ellen was alive, then she was killed in a very short amount of time, or she stabbed herself basically as soon as he left. So it's just a very, very tight timeline that we're talking about here. Now, Sam opens the door because he has a key, but it will only open so far, as we've already said, because the swing bar latch is engaged. You've all seen these at hotels. One part is on the door, the other the frame. And when you swing the latch closed, the door will open so far before the latch slides down to the end of the bar on the door. And the harder you push, the more engaged that latch gets. And so you can basically stick in maybe like your hand, but you can't stick in your whole head. That's how small the opening is. Now, that's about like a 3-inch opening. And Sam called for Ellen to say, hey, the door's latched, let me in. But there was no response. Now, Sam sends a series of texts growing more and more angry, and he called her. Calls registered from Sam between 5:30 and 5:42. He sent a series of texts starting at 5:32 and ending at 5:54. Still, there is no response. So Sam goes downstairs and asks the doorman if he'll help him break into his apartment. The doorman says they have a policy against that, and Sam is on his own. I understand that. The doorman probably cannot be someone who helps someone else break down the door, even if it's their girlfriend's apartment or their own apartment. Now, the doorman does make a call to Ellen's cell phone at 6:07 and 6:10. The doorman notices that Sam was wearing Timberland boots, which he found strange given that Sam had just come from the gym. They're kind of like the thicker sole. They usually go a little higher up the ankle. They're not running shoes. They're pretty heavy because they're to help you navigate kind of rocky climbing, hiking situations, not running on a treadmill. So this was kind of out of the ordinary, and the doorman does notice what he's wearing. Now, Sam goes back upstairs and around 6:30. So it's been an hour since he's tried to get into the apartment. He breaks down the door. And when he does, Sam finds Ellen on the floor of the kitchen in a pool of blood.
So I just want to point out, this is 6:30, right? This is 6:30 when this happens. And Alice is about to go back in time a little bit to some things that seem strange given the timeline that we have just given you to this point. So 6:30, he enters the apartment and he finds Ellen dead on the floor.
Right. So let's go backwards in time. At 6:14, according to Gavin Fish, and he keeps his sources confidential, at this point, Sam calls Kamian Schwartzman. Kamian is Sam's first cousin and good friend. At 6:26, Sam answers a call from James Schwartzman, his uncle, who is also a prominent attorney and who, according to reports, will be on the scene before the police. So these two calls happen before he ever gets into the apartment and sees what has happened to Ellen.
And that's weird, right? You know, it's funny, you lay out these timelines, and sometimes I almost feel like the timelines define, and this is the reason we always do it first, they define so much about the case. When things happen is so important. And everything up to when we reach this kind of makes sense, right? He goes to the gym, he spends 30 minutes there, he goes down there, he tries to get in the house, he can't get in the house, he calls a bunch of times, he goes downstairs, he goes back up. But, I mean, you got the doorman who's calling her number at 6:10. 4 minutes later, he's calling his cousin. Why is he calling his cousin? His very good friend is his cousin at 6:14. I mean, is he calling just to complain about Ellen? Presumably, he's gone back up there to break in the door. That's what he's planning on doing. I mean, does he need tips on how to break down the door from his cousin? But what's even more interesting to me is the fact that 12 minutes later, his uncle calls him.
Right.
This is often reported as he calls his uncle, but that's not what happens. His uncle calls him. So that means he calls his friend, his cousin. He tells him something that leads his cousin to call his father, who then calls him, and then supposedly 4 minutes later, he breaks down the door and finds her body.
And in some, kind of seems as well that, let's see, he is downstairs by the guard around 6 o'clock because the doorman is calling Ellen at 6:07 and 6:10. And so around this time, instead of going straight up, it's almost like Sam is waiting for a call before he goes up to break down the door. And one thing I'd like to note is notice who he doesn't call during this time of supposed what's going on. He doesn't call any of Ellen's friends. He doesn't call Ellen's mother, Ellen's girlfriends. Typically if I'm trying to find someone and someone I'm close to, say my spouse, and I can't get a hold of them, I call his friends because maybe they're on the phone with each other. Maybe it's a deep conversation. People that he normally talks to, maybe he's stuck on the phone and he stepped out for a second. And that's why he's not answering my calls, because these are the people he's typically in contact with. He doesn't call any of Ellen's friends or family during this period.
No. And I just think this is such a critical moment. And as we continue to go through the timeline, I think you're going to see even more about why this is critical. But these two calls, to me, throw into question a lot of the timeline as we've laid it out to you so far. And for reasons we'll discuss, I mean, this doesn't necessarily mean that Sam's involved in anything, but it does make me believe that the timeline is not entirely accurate. We haven't mentioned this, but they lived in a 6th floor apartment. So, however long it would take him to get up and down the elevator, I guess also factors into this timeline. So, going back to 6:30, apparently he breaks down the door. At 6:33, he calls 911. We're going to go through this 911 call later. He says he doesn't know what happened to Ellen, but she is on the ground in a pool of blood, and he thinks she hit her head. At this point, he doesn't even know that she's been stabbed. He's on the phone. He doesn't really know how to do CPR. The 911 operator is going to walk him through it, but as he's getting ready to start CPR, he stops because he sees a knife protruding from Ellen's chest. Now, this knife was a steak knife, single-sided and serrated with a 12.5 centimeter long blade. So just your standard steak knife. He sees this. He cries out that she stabbed herself, though he then changes that she may have fallen on the knife. And like I said, we're going to hear all this later, but this all happens pretty quickly after he calls 911. So he's calling 911 at 6:33. According to video cameras, which have been analyzed to death, at 6:34, so 1 minute after he calls 911, Kamian Schwartzman arrives at the apartment building. So this is the person that he had called back at 6:14. So 20 minutes after that call, he is now on scene at the apartment building. At 6:36, the paramedics have arrived. They go up to the 6th floor. By 6:40, they've declared Ellen is dead. At this point, the police are also on the scene. They will take Sam into custody, which is pretty standard. transport him to the police station where he will be questioned. Now, some interesting things happen in the immediate aftermath of this, and we'll get into this a little bit more later on. But what you should know is initially the police thought this was a suicide for reasons that we've already discussed. She's inside, she's alone, no evidence of an intruder, no evidence of a struggle, the door was locked from the inside, she stabbed herself to death. The medical examiner, on the other hand, when they look at it, they initially make a finding that this is a homicide. But after further investigation and some questionable things that we're going to talk about, on March 7th, 2011, so about a month and a couple weeks after this happens, the medical examiner changes the manner of death from homicide to suicide. And that's what launches this controversy, because you can imagine, if you're the family and friends, you initially are being told this is a suicide, you don't understand it, it doesn't make any sense to you. And then, and this literally happens as they're getting ready for the funeral. Her father hears, I believe from the media, I don't even think it's from the police, that the death is going to be classified as a homicide. And he announces this at the funeral, which had to just be a shock to everybody. And from that point forward, the family was pretty convinced this was a homicide. Now, eventually, the medical examiner will be swayed and will change this cause of death to suicide, but the family never gave up. And this was now 11 years ago. But they have been fighting since that point to get the police to look further into this case. And when that failed, they actually sued the city and the police. They are asking, and we're going to talk about this as we get into the legal side of this, they're essentially asking for an order from the court that the medical examiner re-examine the cause of death and change the cause of death from suicide to homicide. There's a lot of really interesting stuff there. A lot of really interesting legal questions. We're going to get into that later. But just know this is ongoing. And this is a family that's still fighting. And literally things are happening right now in this case. So even though this is, 11 years is a long time. Ordinarily, 11 years would definitely be long enough for a case to go cold. This case is not cold. It's hot. And it is a labyrinth of twists and turns. And we've given you the timeline, but as we look deeper at this evidence, I think you're going to start to see why this case has generated so much attention and controversy and discussion, and why it is worth another look, certainly by podcasters like us, but I would say by the city of Philadelphia.
Absolutely. And now we're going to go through some kind of technical things now, but I think this is incredibly important. We're going to go through each of Ellen's stab wounds because remember, it's either homicide or suicide. Now, of course, it is possible to stab yourself to death, but listen to these 20 stab wounds, what they did to Ellen physically, and also how deep they were. Remember, this is a pretty standard steak knife. You can probably imagine in your head, this is a little bit longer than your hand, serrated steak knife. And 8 of the wounds were on Ellen's chest. These were marked as A through H, and their depth, so how much it went into her chest, are as follows. Remember, the steak knife is about 12.5 centimeters long. The first wound on her chest was 0.2 centimeters. So was the second one. The third one is 1.4 centimeters, slightly right to left stroke.
And that's important, the direction, and something to pay attention to. And we're going to note that when it's indicated. So some of these are just straight in, like these 0.2 centimeters straight in, very shallow. Something we're going to spend a lot of time on because what does that mean? But the direction, remember, this person has to be stabbing themselves. And I'll just tell you, when we were getting ready for this, the number of times I've stabbed myself with a ruler trying to recreate this is slightly scary. But in any event, right to left stroke versus a left to right stroke could indicate which hand the person's using. Just try and do it yourself, right? I mean, if you're holding the knife in your right hand and
you're twisting it.
Exactly, right. Versus your left hand. So it probably indicates which hand the person is holding it, given which direction this stroke goes. And there's also some strokes that are going up and some strokes that are going down, which we'll also mention. But just something to keep in mind as you're trying to imagine how these knife wounds would have been made to this person.
Okay, so far we have A, B, and C wounds. 0.2 centimeters, 0.2 centimeters, 1.4 centimeters, slightly right, bend to the left stroke. D is also a 0.2 centimeter wound. So these 4 so far have been incredibly shallow, almost like a prick, right? Now, E is different than the previous 4. Wound E is 10 centimeters, so almost the entire blade of the steak knife, incising the aortic arch and the upper lobe of the left lung, resulting in 600 milliliters of liquid blood in the left pleural cavity and 500 milliliters in the right pleural cavity, as well as 120 milliliters of liquid and clotted blood in the pericardial sac. The stab wound was left to right and a downward stroke. So 3 motions, left to right, downward stroke. And this was kind of the first of the 5 wounds we've talked about that really resulted in some massive physical damage. In other words, her lungs are filling up with blood.
Yeah, and this is the kind of thing that kills you. This massive internal bleeding. It's interesting when you look at the crime scene photos. We're going to put photos of various things on the website, most of which we stole from Gavin Fish. There's stuff, there's the knife. If you're watching YouTube, you've probably seen the knife already. We're going to show you all of that so you have some idea of this. This 20 stab wounds is a lot. This is not a bloody scene. Not a bloody scene at all. Most of the bleeding was internal. It's one of the reasons she died so quickly. This, she's got tons of blood that would be filling up her lungs and the area around her lungs. This blood that's filling up the area around her heart. I mean, this wound alone was enough to kill her. This is the wound, the final wound. This is the one where you see the knife or where Sam saw the knife sticking out of her chest. I mean, this is sort of the ultimate wound. And if her other wounds weren't going to kill her, this one was. And I want to note again, left to right. So this is a left to right stabbing motion. The first one was slightly right to left. Now, exactly what that means, from whose direction, it's kind of like I'm always confused about what's right field and left field. Is it from the batter's perspective or the outfielder's perspective? I'm not very sporty. And it's the same type of thing here. I don't know if this is if you're looking at her chest or if it's from her perspective with the right to left, left to right. But it doesn't matter. If you imagine stabbing yourself, just doing it naturally with one hand, you will go in a certain direction. And if you do it with the other hand, you're going to go in the other direction, right? Well, these 2 stab wounds seem like they're made, if they're made by her. If she is doing this to herself, this is not necessarily true of someone stabbing her, right? Because she's moving, they're moving. It could be all sorts of different directions and everything else. But if she's stabbing herself, it would seem like this means she is changing hands, or at least changing the way she's holding the knife. Something is changing here. And if you're stabbing yourself, it's a little hard to believe that you would change hands. It's one thing, we've talked about people who stab themselves to try and make it look like someone else stabbed them, right? That happens weirdly more than you would think. They often will use their non-dominant hand because they're smart enough to think, oh, if I use my non-dominant hand, they won't be able to figure out it was me, right? This is not that. This is somebody who appears to be changing hands with each stab, which is a weird thing. So, and this won't be the end of that. But yeah, I mean, this is the one, if nothing else, this is the one that killed her. Alice, I'm feeling much better now, but I was sick for a while, and one of the few things that gave me relief was Tivic Clearup. If you've got sinus pain, congestion, heaviness in the face and eyes, headaches, runny nose, or watery eyes, all the things that you get when you've got a cold or maybe seasonal allergies are hitting you. Over-the-counter prescription drugs with side effects and messy sprays are a hard way to live for many people suffering from these conditions. I'm here to tell you about a revolutionary product that will change your life forever. Introducing Tivic Clearup, an easy-to-use, FDA-approved medical device that fits in the palm of your hand.
Created by doctors and neuroscientists, Tivic Clearup stops suffering by using bioelectronic technology to reduce sinus pain and congestion. Simply glide Tivic Clearup on areas of your face where you are experiencing sinus pain. Try Tivic Clearup today with a 60-day risk-free trial. Go to tivichealth.com, that's TIVIC health.com, and enter promo code prosecutors22 to receive $20 off plus free shipping on your ClearUp device. Tivic Clearup works when nothing else can.
Alice, I want to talk about one of our favorite sponsors, ButcherBox. What do you guys think about when you hear high-quality meats? Price, how expensive it's going to be, how you're going to have to go to a butcher and find one just to get a nice steak. Well, that's where ButcherBox comes in. ButcherBox takes the guesswork out of finding high-quality meat and seafood you can trust. And it is convenient. You can get just what you want delivered right to your doorstep. There's free shipping for the continental U.S. and no surprise fees. You can choose from a variety of box plan options from curated to customized and change your plan whenever you want.
Brett, I love these high quality meats for my family that loves everything from, flank steak to pot roasts. And with ButcherBox, this quality meat arrives at my door. And these are hard to come by high quality meats at the grocery store, but it's an amazing value from ButcherBox. And there are recipe inspirations, guides, tips, and hacks so you can cook up mouth-watering meals. Take chicken breasts off your grocery list because ButcherBox is offering our listeners an incredible deal that they've never offered before. Free chicken for a year. Get 2 pounds of free-range organic chicken breasts for free in every order when you sign up at butcherbox.com/prosecute and use code prosecute. Claim this deal at butcherbox.com/prosecute and use code prosecute. The Prosecutors Podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Let's face it, sometimes multitasking can be overwhelming. Like when your favorite podcast is playing and the person next to you is talking and your car fan is blasting, all while you're trying to find the perfect parking spot. But then again, sometimes multitasking is easy, like quoting with Progressive Insurance. They do the hard work of comparing rates so you can find a great rate that works for you, even if it's not with them. Give their nifty comparison tool a try, and you might just find getting the rate and coverage you deserve is easy.
All you need to do is visit Progressive's website to get a quote with all the coverages you want, like comprehensive and collision coverage or personal injury protection. Then you'll see Progressive's direct rate, and their tool will provide options from other companies all lined up and ready to compare, so it's simple to choose the rate and coverages you like. Press play on comparing auto rates. Quote at Progressive.com to join the over 27 million drivers who trust Progressive. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Comparison rates not available in all states or situations. Prices vary based on how you buy.
There's no one-size-fits-all solution when it comes to hair care. A product that works wonders for curls might make straight hair limp and greasy. For me, my hair just gets dry and cracked, and I get really bad split ends. But thanks to my personalized Prose routine, I can honestly say I've never been more in love with my hair. With Prose's amazing personalization of hair care, I've been able to get root supplements and hair masks and leave-in conditioners that have completely changed the texture of my hair. Now it's so soft, I haven't been able to find a single split end, and I am so happy with my Prose routine. Prose makes custom hair care that's effective because it's personal, using natural ingredients with proven results. Prose customizes every product in your routine, from shampoo to supplements. Prose starts by asking about you as a person with their in-depth consultation. They ask me unexpected things like, where do I live? What are my eating habits? How do I exercise? And then next, Prose analyzed all my answers and determined what unique blend of ingredients should be in every product of my custom routine.
You know, Alice, my wife has curly hair, and she has a really hard time finding shampoo that works for her. And she said because of this quiz, it's like the first time she's ever had hair products that actually seem like they were designed for her. And that's because Prose analyzes your answers when you take this quiz, and it determines the unique blend of ingredients that should be in every product of your custom routine. Together, Prose can have all of your hair goals covered. It's also a carbon neutral certified B Corp, and it's an industry leader in clean and responsible beauty. If you're not 100% positive Prose is the best hair care you've had, they will take the products back, no questions asked. That's a deal you can't beat. Prose is the healthy hair regimen with your name all over it. Take your free in-depth hair consultation and get 15% off your first order today. Go to prose.com/prosecute. That's Prose, PROSE.com/prosecute for your free in-depth hair consultation and 15% off.
Now let's keep going through because we've only gone through a few of the wounds, but there are 20. So wound F was another shallow one, 0.2 centimeters. Wound G, also 0.2 centimeters. So far we've had a lot of very shallow stabs and then that one huge stab to the aorta. Wound H is 4 centimeters and 2.3 centimeters into the liver, leading to bleeding into the abdominal space. And this stab wound was left to right. So now she has massive damage to her lungs and heart and also to her liver. Now, those are the chest wounds. She was stabbed once in the abdomen, and that was labeled wound I. That one was a little deeper. That was 6 centimeters, and this one also went from left to right. So about half the steak knife is in her. She had 11 stab wounds in her head and scalp. So what was labeled as wound J was in the scalp, and it was 6.5 centimeters, about half the steak knife blade. Wound K, pretty shallow, 0.3 centimeters, left to right, back to front. So a lot of motion there.
So, and this is important to remember. And so when we're saying head and scalp, this is like basically from the back of her head down. So the back of her head, down the back of her head, into the back of her neck. So pretty much everything from where the neck begins up. And back to front's important because she's not stabbing herself in her neck, in the front of her neck. She's not stabbing herself in the front of her face or in the top of her head. She's literally stabbing herself in the back of her head and then in the back of her neck. So you're going to keep hearing back to front. And it's because, once again, imagine you're holding that knife in whichever hand you prefer, reaching behind you and stabbing yourself in the back of the neck and in the back of the head. And I just want to say, that scalp stab wound, that seems pretty deep to me. 6.5 centimeters in the scalp. Scalp's not very thick. There's a bone there. I mean, the stab wound to her abdomen is only 6 centimeters. So the scalp stab wound is actually a little deeper than that. And she's stabbing herself in the back of the head.
Yeah, great points, Brett. Okay, we're not even done with her head and scalp yet. So we had that, what was labeled as wound K. That was the 0.3 centimeters in the scalp, left to right, back to front. So from the back. Wound L, another shallow one, 0.2 centimeters, also left to right, back to front. So almost identical to the wound we just talked about. Wound M was 0.3 centimeters, also from the back to front. Wound N is a deep one, 8 centimeters deep, and it led to bleeding on the brain, and it was left to right, back to front, and upwards. So what Brett just said, you obviously have your skull on your head, and so it's not easy to get very deep in your head without a lot of force, especially with something like a steak knife. 8 centimeters is, 3/4 of that steak knife blade into the head from the back, but not only just from the back, it's dragging forward because it's going upwards, and it's so deep that it has reached the brain, and there's now bleeding in the brain. Remember, there's bleeding in the abdomen, in the liver, there's bleeding in the lungs and the heart, and now there's bleeding in the brain. Each of these wounds probably could have killed her.
No, I think that's right. And I want to stress here the upward trajectory of this stab wound. So once again, if you've got your ruler or your pencil or some other thing that won't hurt you, I want you to grab it, and I want you to reach behind you and imagine stabbing yourself sort of in the neck, going into your brain, essentially, going left to right and upward. So you're stabbing yourself in an upward direction with this knife. And I mean, I'm not saying it's impossible, because it's not. But if you try and do it, you'll feel how awkward it is to do.
Especially if, I don't know that we know exactly when all of these wounds were made, but any of these 3 wounds I've just listed probably could have led to her death. So at least after the first wound, you would have had to inflict the other wound with another fatal wound. So whether it's the bleeding brain or the bleeding heart and lungs, those would have been bleeding when stabbing the other fatal wounds, which requires a good amount of force to be able to reach that deeply into your chest, because again, you have your rib cage there, and your head and scalp because of your skull. Let's keep going, because we're not done with all of her stab wounds yet. Wound O was 3 centimeters deep, and it was right to left. So up until now, we've had a lot of left to rights. This one's right to left and also back to front. Wound P is 2.1 centimeters deep. It's also right to left and still from the back to front. Wound Q is 2 centimeters deep, this time left to right, and still from the back to the front. Wound R, 1.9 centimeters, this time again, left to right, and still from the back to the front. So kind of in that series of 4 wounds, they're all coming from the back of her head and scalp, and 2 of them are from the right to the left, 2 of them are from the left to right. Wound S, 2.1 centimeters deep. This one's from the left to the right, still from the back to the front. So a lot of not insignificantly deep wounds to the scalp because of the skull. So even to get in 2 centimeters, 3 centimeters is not insignificant here because of the pressure of the skull. Last of the 20 wounds. Wound T, another deep one. It's 7 centimeters deep, and it's between the 2nd and 3rd cervical vertebrae, incising the dura of the spinal cord. So if you kind of reach to the bottom of your head before you get to your neck, those are all your vertebrae, and they are encasing your spine, your spinal fluid, and your spinal cord. And the reason they're encased in there is because they're protecting your spinal cord. If you reach your spinal cord, it can lead to paralysis. And this particular incision did reach into the cervical vertebrae and hit the spinal cord. Now, the autopsy notes that Dr. Lucy Roque examined the spinal cord and concluded that there was no defect to the spinal cord itself. So even though it reached into the spinal vertebra, she says that the spinal cord wasn't cut. This cut was from the right to left, and again, it's to the back. So the 2nd and 3rd cervical vertebra are very close to, they're not the base of your neck, it's closer to the base of your head. And again, it's from the back. And 7 centimeters, again, more than half of the steak knife. You have to use a lot of force. And I'm doing it right now. And I really have to push my elbow back to maybe I'm just not very flexible, but it's kind of an awkward position, especially if I have a 12 centimeter blade and trying to have enough force from behind, because I can only lift my hand back probably 12 centimeters from the back of my neck, and to have enough force to plunge it into your cervical vertebra, which is hard. And again, have that movement of right to left.
And I want all of you to try this at home. If you're not driving your car right now.
Yeah, I mean, literally, my arm's going a little numb right now. I've been holding it behind my head while I've been reading these 11 stab wounds to the neck and scalp, and my hand is actually going numb.
I mean, we're going to talk a lot about these stab wounds. We're going to talk a lot about this last one and what was written in the autopsy report, because that may or may not be accurate, and it's so important, because Alice told you why it's important. If that stab wound damaged the spinal cord, number 1 would be incredibly painful, and number 2 would almost instantaneously paralyze you from the neck down. And what can you not do if you're paralyzed from the neck down? You can't stab yourself. We don't know the order of these stab wounds, but what we know for sure is that the stab wound to the chest was the last one, because that's where the knife was. That's all we know for sure, is that was the last one. So this stab wound, as well as the stab wound into the brain and into the skull, all those, and into the liver, those stabs all happened before that final stab wound. If this one happened, it did happen before that final stab wound, if it damaged the spine, that's huge, because that really casts doubt on this notion that she could continue to stab herself if she has a damaged spinal cord. Obviously, some of this depends on how damaged it is, and as I said, we're going to talk more about how thorough this investigation was of that spinal cord, but such a critical piece of evidence. And I really wish we had more, even than what we're going to talk about later.
Can I take a very quick side note of an Alice story in my spinal cord?
Of course. Prepare the 1-star reviews.
Prepare the 1-star review. Okay. I know that in the autopsy, the doctor noted that there was no defect to the spinal cord itself, but I want to give a little perspective here. And I don't think there's more in the autopsy about what type of damage was done. But if the knife...
I know what story's coming, and it's crazy.
I don't think you know this story, by the way. You might.
Oh, is this a different one? Oh, okay.
Oh, no, it's the same one. I think you do know this one. But what we do know is that because the knife was able to reach into the vertebra, the actual bones were compromised. Right? They're compromised, meaning that they have a job to do. They are enclosed, and they have to be enclosed because there's spinal fluid in there. If it were not enclosed, the spinal fluid would leak out. And that happens in spinal injuries where there's like a crack in your vertebra. And even though the spinal cord itself is intact, the spinal fluid can leak out and cause a lot of damage. And it's actually a slow moving process. So what we do know is that her vertebra was compromised. So even though the spinal cord isn't cut or there's no seeming defect to it, it will have effects on the spinal fluid around the cord. So when I was in law school, I cracked my C7. So lower down than hers. Hers are the second and third. So mine are, if you can feel the vertebra in your neck, mine were a couple down from where hers was stabbed.
You got to tell them how.
Huh?
You got to tell them how.
Yeah, tell them how. I was in a show, like a dance show, and my partner dropped me on my head, but repeatedly, because we were practicing this one like move that required me to flip over him, and he catches me, and I guess I was just too heavy, and he dropped me on my head, but like a dozen times, right? Because it was the night before the show, and we're like, we have to get this right. And so I'm also telling you this because it took a dozen times. Nobody like drops someone on their head a dozen times, except in my situation, right? We were trying to get this move right. So I don't think my vertebra cracked on the first time or the second time or the third time. I think it was probably from repeated impact because your vertebra is there to protect your life, and it's very, very durable. So I was sore, and I remember I actually went to the hospital that night, and I was like, I'm just sore. But of course, who's not sore after I had been rehearsing for like 5 or 6 hours? And I was like, it's fine. I'm going to go home and ice it and go to sleep. When I woke up in the morning, what I didn't know was I had cracked my C7 and spinal fluid had started leaking out, and I was paralyzed from the shoulder down. I couldn't feel anything. When I say paralyzed, obviously it was not forever, but because basically my spinal fluid was leaking out, there wasn't enough fluid to protect my spinal cord, and it was touching things, and I could feel just like this coursing fire through my body, but I couldn't move anything. I couldn't lift my feet. I couldn't lift my hands, and I just laid in bed, and I was like, this is how I'm going to die. No one's going to know I'm here. I couldn't ask for help. I couldn't call anybody. I couldn't get out of bed. And I laid there for, I have no idea how long because I didn't have a clock next to me, but it was a long time. And slowly I started to feel some tingle in my arm, and I was able to reach the phone next to me and call for help. And I was sent to the hospital. You know, they did the MRI, everything, and they found the crack in my C7. And I was able to heal from it. I am not paralyzed, thankfully. But even without my spinal cord having any sort of defect, I was essentially paralyzed from the neck down for a number of hours, and I couldn't feel anything. And it was a long, long recovery process. So I want to note that because even though her spinal cord wasn't cut, that doesn't mean she didn't have immense effects immediately from her C2 and C3 being stabbed 7 centimeters deep.
Yeah. I mean, hers were more than cracked, right? And even though yours took a little bit of time to really have an effect, she definitely would have had immediate effects.
Absolutely.
Maybe not to the point that she was paralyzed, but she definitely would have had immediate effects. And
it immediately affects your ability to feel things even in your fingers. The first things I felt even after the first drop was my fingers started tingling. And you know what you need your fingers for? Grabbing a knife to stab yourself repeatedly.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't know. I think this is a really significant moment. I think it's going to become more significant as we continue to talk about this case. But hold on to this one, because this is just a massive part of this case. This stab wound and what it would have meant for the rest of them. Now, as we said, if you are not driving your car right now, I want you to try and do this. I want you to get yourself something that you won't hurt yourself with, and just imagine stabbing yourself in the back of the head and the back of the neck 11 times. 11 times she would have done this, with changing directions. You have right to left sometimes, you have left to right other times, back to front, that one upward stroke, I want you to try and do it. Not saying you can't do it, but you will note how awkward it is. Why is this important? It's important for a couple reasons, because even though it's possible, and that's a big deal that it's possible to do this, no one's saying it's impossible. It's kind of like the Ray Rivera case. You'll sometimes hear it was impossible for him to make that jump. No, it's not. It's not impossible. Would have been difficult, but not impossible. The fact that it's not impossible means this could have been a suicide. But the fact that it is so awkward and difficult tells you a couple things. Number one, it tells you that maybe it wasn't a suicide. The fact that the directions change is interesting because that seems like it indicates she's either changing her hand, the way she holds it, in a really dramatic way. I mean, depending on how you hold it when you reach back behind you, it's really hard to stab yourself in a certain direction. It's hard enough just to hold the knife and stab yourself in the natural direction you would go. So if you're holding it with your right hand, you're going to start from the right, you're going to go to the left, right? That's the natural direction you're going to go. If you're holding it with your left hand, opposite. Try and stab yourself from the other direction. Even more awkward and difficult. And she's doing this, you have to believe, I think, and this is the second reason this is important, in some sort of frenzy. And the reason I say that is, if you decide to kill yourself, and as we look more into this, you're going to see even more evidence of this. If she decided to do this, it was a spur-of-the-moment decision, an almost instantaneous decision. And I think it is one that would have to be the result of either just immense anger and rage or some sort of psychotic break because of some of the other factors we're going to look at next week and because of these stab wounds. I don't think someone starts, and it seems like she started with her neck, stabbing themselves in order to kill themselves, stabbing yourself in the back of the neck. That, to me, is a really weird thing to do. I mean, it's just, even imagining it happen. If you saw someone doing it, I mean, look, it would be crazy to see someone stab themselves anywhere, but the stabbing yourself in the back of the neck, and maybe it's just me, but I have like an even more visceral reaction to that. And how insane that would appear to be if you were watching that happening than someone who does something which is far more common. If you look at statistics, if you're going to stab yourself to death, you don't do it this way. Stabbing yourself in the back of the neck, this may be the only case where that happens. Obviously, there's the cutting of your wrist. Everybody knows about that. But usually, if you're literally going to stab yourself, stab wound to the heart, that's actually pretty common. People do that a lot. Stabbing yourself in the neck is pretty common, but it's in the front of your neck, cutting your throat, the sort of Darley-Routier scenario, right? Even stabbing yourself in the stomach, though that kind of depends on your culture. But the stabbing yourself in the back of the neck is bizarre, and it indicates to me if this is a suicide, it's a certain kind of suicide. And I also think, though, that it is a check in the column of this seems like more of a murder than a suicide. Just the fact of these 10 stab wounds to the neck.
And I know we've spent a lot of time on these stab wounds, and we should. We absolutely should. But one thing I just want to tease you all with before we sign off for the day, something else really struck me as we went through the timeline, as we went through the story, and we haven't even looked in detail at them yet. But one thing that really struck me was how angry Sam got as opposed to worried. So those of you who have spouses or children, when I can't find one of them and I know they should be somewhere they are, my first reaction is not anger. It's actually like incredible fear and pit at the bottom of my stomach that something has happened. So I will just leave that there right now. But the anger is something that jumps out at me, especially as Brett, you were talking about the rage that it would take to inflict, whether it was Ellen or someone else, to inflict these 20 wounds, 3 of them that are just devastating to her life, and all with an ordinary home steak knife.
Yeah. And we have, as Alice has teased, we have a lot to talk about. These are not the only wounds we're going to talk about. There are also some bruises on Ellen's body, which are interesting. And it's not just breaking down the door that shows you how angry Sam was. We're going to look at those text messages that he sent and see what we can make of those. We're going to talk about some weird things about the apartment. There was no sign of struggle. There was no sign of a break-in, and that is kind of weird. We're going to talk about that door and how it was broken down. And what does the damage look like? Does it look like the kind of damage you would expect if a door was broken down? We're going to get more into these calls, who Sam called and why he called them. And we're going to play the 911 call in this case, which is, we always say, don't put a lot of stock in 911 calls. This is one of the weirdest 911 calls you're going to hear. Like, if you think the Patsy Ramsey 911 call is weird, it got nothing on this one. This is a very strange 911 call, and we're gonna play it for you, the whole thing, and listen to it and comment on what we hear. And then we're going to come to some of the legal things that have happened in this case, some of the things that experts have said about Ellen's body and about the wounds to her. And eventually we will come to a conclusion about what we think happened in this case and what we think should happen next. Like I said, this one's going to take us a little while, and we're going to take our time with it because it's important. One way or the other, Ellen's family deserves answers about whatever happened to her. The mystery, you talk about this with missing persons cases sometimes. As bad as it is to know for certain that your loved one has passed on, as bad as that is, the not knowing can almost be worse, may be worse in some circumstances. And I feel like Ellen's family is dealing with a version of that. Their daughter is dead in extremely strange circumstances, and they have no idea how it happened. And they're being told by the police it's a suicide. And then they look at the facts of the case. It doesn't look like a suicide to them. And they deserve answers as much as anybody.
And what we do know, we'll kind of end with this. What we do know is that however she got these stab wounds, self-inflicted or otherwise, this was an incredibly painful, horrendous death. She was conscious for most of these stab wounds, and they would have led to kind of a slow death as, her heart bled out, her abdomen kind of filled up with fluid, and her brain was bleeding and swelled, and there was incredible pressure on her skull. This was incredibly painful, no matter how these stab wounds were inflicted.
Yeah, 100%. And you know how we said that if you look at the telephone calls and the timeline, it doesn't line up with the story you're being told? That doesn't line up with the story being told either. Because I'll go ahead and tell you, whatever happened in this case, something happened in that apartment before Sam went to the gym. I don't know what it was. I'm not saying, right now at least, that he stabbed her to death in those moments before he went to the gym. But something happened. There was some event there. He didn't just say, "See you later, honey, going to the gym." She's like, "Oh yeah, see you later." And then this rage-filled suicide happened. That didn't happen. There was a lot more going on in this case. And unfortunately, at least as far as we know, it seems like Sam has never really given answers to that. So we're going to look more at this case. It's a fascinating case. I'm struggling to stop talking about this case, but we've gone an hour. And so again, I just want to keep talking, but we're trying not to be one of those podcasts that starts an hour and then all of a sudden it's an hour and a half. And all of a sudden they're doing 2-hour episodes and then they're 4-hour episodes. So anyway, trying to keep this at least somewhat commute reasonable. But in any event, we're going to talk about this a lot more in the coming weeks. Interested to hear what you think about this case already. You guys probably already have thoughts. A lot of you follow this case closely. If there's anything we're missing or things you want us to focus on, please let us know. Hit us up at prosecutorspod@gmail.com, at prosecutorspod for all your social media. We are going to be posting photographs, like I said, everything we stole from Gavin. We'll be posting that stuff on the website. If you want to see the knife, if you want to see a diagram, a demonstrative maybe, of all the stab wounds and exactly where they were in her body and in the back of her neck, we're going to post that as well.
That's a hard picture to look at, by the way, Brett.
Yeah, it is. It's especially with all the knives, it's very strange. But anyways, I think if you really want to dive into this case, I think you should look at the picture because I think it tells you a lot about how this went down. We'll do some photograph of the knife so you can see what the knife looks like, as well as some crime scene photos. But look at those things if you want to. We're also going to post a few things from the civil action. So if you're interested in reading the decisions of the courts that are looking at this case right now, in this civil case that the family has brought, we will be posting that as well so you can read those. Well, Alice, is there anything else you want to add before we sign off for today?
No, but I see why this has been so requested from a lot of our listeners, because once you get into it, it really sucks you in. There's so much more to discuss. And for Ellen's sake, I'm really, really glad that we are looking at this.
I am as well, and we are going to be back next week to talk more about this case. But until then, I'm Brett.
And I'm Alice.
And we are the prosecutors. This one will take at least three,
4?
I think 3 or 4. Yeah, depends on how fast we go. But there's a lot to talk about. So.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, I gotta get a word for you guys. Gotta get a word. I have a word.
Cheesy.
Cheesy.
Because I'm eating cheese right now.
Yeah, I got the joke. You didn't have to explain it.
No, I just want to make sure you got the joke. Not everyone is as witty as me, you know?
I did. That's true. It's true.
Sorry, I've been sneezing like crazy. I have no idea why. So. Oh, I know why. I did yard work.
There you go. That would explain it.
I was wondering. Okay, maybe I should go take some. Alex,
So you're such a detective. This is why you're such a great true crime podcaster, because of your ability to cut through to the evidence.
All this month, stream the funniest films for free on Pluto TV. Watch comedy classics like Anchorman, The Legend of Ron Burgundy, and Mean Girls. Or drop in for a Tyler Perry marathon with a Medea family funeral and Medea's witness protection. Pluto TV also has hundreds of channels and thousands of movies and TV shows like Get Shorty, Be Cool, Key and Peele, Comedy in Color, and more. And no contracts, no subscriptions, no fees, no joke. So download the Pluto TV app on your favorite streaming device and start laughing today. Pluto TV, drop in, watch free.